Hello viewers, my name is Jim Hollister, Park Ranger at Minuteman National Historical Park, and you are about to watch an amazing video featuring a number of April 19th witness houses that still, nearly 250 years later, bear the physical scars of the battle in the form of bullet strikes. Now, what I find so interesting and powerful about these bullet strikes is that they're within homes, domestic spaces where we're supposed to feel safe. And this really, I think, is powerful testimony to the sense of intrusion and shocking violence resulting from the events of April 19, 1775. Now, towards the end of the video, please stay with us. We're going to feature an interview with archaeologist Dr. Doug Scott and historians Joel Bowie and Chris Fox about their ongoing research to document and analyze all known April 19th bullet strikes and a few unknown. So, enjoy the video.
So we're here at the Elisha Jones House, part of Minuteman National Park. This is a private residence, and we have a shed that is attached to the house currently, but in the 18th century, it was probably a little bit further down. It was moved at some point and attached to the house. But there's an account of a bullet striking it from British light infantry who were retreating from North Bridge. And we've got the strike right here. You can see this diamond with the white clapboards or white sheathing behind it, white painted sheathing. The strike measures just about .70, so just over a .69 caliber ball from a British musket. And people have questioned it for a long time. But there's some telltale signs on the inside of the building that we'll look at in a minute. So we're inside the Elisha Jones House shed right now, and you can see we saw the outside of the bullet hole. Now you can see the inside where it blew through the wall and hit this oak post and shot across to the back of the room. But you can see the typical blowout that happens when something's hit by a bullet, where the chunks of wood fly off. So as you get to Lexington, one of the first bullet strikes is from the front door of the Buckman Tavern, and you can see it right here. The ball went through at an angle and probably rattled off the wall or went through the wall on the inside. And we actually used a ballistics rod to figure out where the shot came from, and it's in a low area right out front. You can basically get a good idea of where the shooter was standing. It's a .69 caliber ball that went through. It gauges at about .70, so we know it was a British musket ball, and it was more than likely fired during the retreat, right before Percy's forces arrived. Here we have the exit of that musket ball that went through the front of the Buckman Tavern door. You can see where it came through at an angle, right here, and the typical blowout. It blew the back of the board off. But it's typical of most all the musket balls that we study. So we're in the Monroe Tavern, owned by the Lexington Historical Society. In the tavern, we have a bullet strike in the ceiling. Probably came through the window from Mass Ave right out here. And it hit the ceiling of the tap room right here. And this was so important to the family that over the generations they kept it. They redid the ceiling around it, but still kept that hole so that everybody could see it and remember what happened that day. So we're here at the Jason Russell House in Arlington, Massachusetts. At the time of the battle, this would have been the village of Menotomy, a part of Cambridge. And we're with Director of the Historical Society, Sarah Lundberg. Sarah, you want to tell us a little bit about Jason Russell and the events of April 19th?
Yeah, so the house was built in the 1740s by Jason Russell, who worked as a farmer like most people in Menotomy. He had about 100 acres of farmland that stretched all the way up what is now called Jason Street in his honor. By 1775, he was an older man in his late 50s. Most of his family had moved on, and he lived in the house with his two youngest children and his wife. And as the battle was going on, his family was sent to safety up the street in what is today Belmont. But Jason decided to make a stand and to protect his house and his property. And he used the stone wall along the side of what is today Mass Avenue, and he used some shingles that he had for working on his house to kind of reinforce the gate and was firing on the troops, but what he didn't realize was that some flankers would be coming around the back of the house, and they essentially caught him from the rear, and he tried to retreat into the house, as did many other people, and he unfortunately didn't make it and was killed somewhere around his front door.
So along with Jason Russell, there were 11 other men killed from a variety of towns, Danvers, Needham, and there was battle damage to this house. So we're going to go inside with Chris Fox, colleague on this ballistic strike study, and we're going to go take a look at some of those bullet strikes. Let's go inside.
As Sarah and Joel were describing, the Jason Russell House is the site of some very intense fighting in the afternoon of April 19th, 1775, as the British forces were retreating back to Boston. And what this house preserves are a number of bullet strikes where British soldiers were firing into the house during that afternoon. And what we have noticed is that they were specifically firing at windows. And in the case of this bullet strike right here, it's across the room just from a window facing current-day Massachusetts Avenue. It's a bullet size, it's a British ball-sized hole. And what's interesting is when we used a bore scope to look into the hole, we can see that when the bullet passed through the paneling here, striking some wood inside, it actually sort of changed shape a bit, as you might expect with a soft lead ball, and then it passed through the plaster on the back side of the wall. And we'll walk out into the hallway here, and we'll be able to take a look at what happened to that ball after it went through the wall. So after the ball passed through that panel in the parlor and came through the plaster on this side, amazingly enough, it impacted the corner of this newel post, leaving this deep gash in the corner of it, at which point it glanced off of that, passing maybe through the door behind me or hitting some other portion of the wall, but we don't see any evidence of sort of where it went after it struck that post. This is the kitchen of the Jason Russell House, where some very intense fighting took place also in the afternoon of April 19th. As the British were retreating back to Boston, they quickly surrounded this house, and some men from Beverly, Massachusetts were in here, and as the British were surrounding it, they couldn't get out, so they had to hide themselves somewhere. And what they did is a group of men went down into the cellar through the door behind me. When the British came in, they knew that the soldiers were in here, and somehow they must have been alerted to the fact that they were in the cellar, and the British seemingly began firing through this door. This is a reproduction. And when they did that, it left some very amazing evidence of that day's fight in the form of these two bullet holes in the risers of the stairs going to the second floor just inside. You can see them highlighted there with a 19th century sign on the one riser, and then through the cutout on the one behind it, or just below it. Now, as we were doing this study last fall, documenting these holes, we actually discovered another hole that had apparently never been noticed before. And it's located just inside the doorway here, where apparently a ball went through the original surround on this door, passed through like the wall sheathing here before ending up maybe as one of these shots that we see in the risers. So on the outside of these risers, we can see where the balls exited from where they were fired through the stairs from the kitchen area. And what's interesting to note is the fact that the back side here has this area where you can see the wood has clearly been splintered out when the ball passed through it. Clear evidence that the balls came from the other side or the kitchen.
So today I'm joined by three very special guests, historians Joel Bowie and Chris Fox, and archaeologist Dr. Doug Scott, who have been studying and documenting these bullet strikes for quite some time. So gentlemen, just a very basic question. What can we learn from studying these bullet strikes?
Well, I think, I think all of us will agree with this, that, we went into this thinking about it in a bunch of different ways. The violence of the day, reading the primary accounts of what the British were doing on the retreat, which was shooting at windows, trying to shoot at any position that a provincial could fire back. But then as, Chris and I, and then Chris and Doug and I went through the house, we started to look at the caliber of the ball. We could tell what type of gun they came from and where they came from. And I think that was one of the most fascinating things for me, was when, Doug would put the ballistics rods in and Chris was holding the laser and you could see where the shooter was standing.
And I agree that finding where the shooters were standing, and what we're using is a very simple process. We're adapting forensic firearms shooting incident reconstruction techniques to essentially very large artifacts. The Jason Russell house in this particular case, and the bullet holes are defects in that artifact. And with that information, by using presumptive lead tests and trajectory rods and the lasers, we can reconstruct where these soldiers were standing and where they and when and how they fired into the house, and the residual effect of that, of leaving holes in those walls.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I think the other thing that perhaps we have gained a stronger understanding about is the fact that these bullet holes were preserved. They were saved. They're still here to be seen, which I think speaks volumes about the importance of what was happening to those folks on April 19th, 1775. And they knew that this was a momentous occasion in certainly not only just their lives, but the lives of the country that they were just about to form, I believe. And knowing that, a lot of folks made sure that those sites remained visible so that people, I think, didn't forget.
Oh, that's fascinating. And was there anything that surprised you in the course of this study?
Well, in my case, with the looking at the bullet holes, and I agree with Chris, this is a memorialization process of a momentous signal event in American history. And people realize they need to preserve these things, or at least some of them. But it becomes very personal when you think about that a gun held by a British regular fired into that house, and may or may not have struck anyone. These are very personal artifacts, very poignant artifacts or defects in those walls that people decided to preserve and pass down through the generations. That's a remarkable thing.
Yeah, it is. And we were talking about the Jason Russell house, but we managed to hit every bullet strike, so to speak, that's left. And, some of them we found through newspaper searches where they were memorialized and discussed in the 1800s. And, some of the structures that were discussed are gone, and some of the objects they've talked about are gone. But there's still quite a few reminders left that were saved. And it was, as Chris and I have gone down the list, we've looked at every one of them, and it's just amazing that these things do survive.
I think it's also remarkable that, and Doug has certainly described this already, that we were able to trace trajectories, and in one case see where a bullet had passed through the siding and sheathing of the Jason Russell house, then passed through an interior partition, and then deflected off of a ceiling. To have the 3 sites of impact from one shot is pretty remarkable. And one of the amazing things that was realized as we were sort of realizing this ourselves is that nobody had put it together in the past, seemingly. We had made a new discovery. And there were other discoveries like that were made in the Jason Russell house that just, when it all comes together, it just serves to better illustrate the ferocity and the drama that was unfolding that day.
So by using these modern techniques, you're really able to sort of place soldiers, in proximity to the house, and in a way kind of reconstruct what was happening inside and outside of the house. It sounds like, like a sort of like a modern crime scene investigation.
That's exactly what it is. It's using those forensic shooting incident reconstruction techniques and theory and applying it to a historic event in this particular case. So it's an archaeological application, not true forensics, since that's science applied to the law. So we don't have a legal issue here. But it is still remarkable to be in those in that house the Jason Russell House, or see the panels that are in museum collections or siding that have been saved, and see those holes that were clearly caused by bullets. And in some cases, we're even using a presumptive lead test, able to come up with a confirmation that a ball passed through that particular piece of wood. And it adds poignancy to it, to see that these things were preserved and that we can learn something about the past from them that we maybe didn't know. In the case of Jason Russell House, it's the location of the shooters. Where were they in the surrounding area, in the yard, on the road, wherever they might have been?
Absolutely. The other thing that struck me was that, these balls are passing through multiple layers of wood. These aren't slingshots. I mean, these are relatively powerful weapons. Can you tell us anything about like the range that they're fired from, how that might impact their hitting power?
Well, the one Chris mentioned is probably, for me anyway, one of the coolest ones in the Jason Russell House. You could see right where the shooter was standing, right down below, from the kitchen parlor, the upstairs room. And you could see where the ball had struck at an angle and blew the wood of the paneling out before it went up and hit the wall and then skipped off the ceiling, as Chris has said. The power of that musket ball. The shooter was close. He was very close.
And I think that's an important point here, is that the shooters were close to that house, standing just on the yard just below, shooting at or through that window, or standing on the road in front of the house, about where present-day Massachusetts Avenue is. It's pretty close range. So as those muskets were fired, being that they're close range, the shot still has a lot of energy in it as it strikes that building.
In a way, this also ties into the ballistic study that we have been working on for 4 or 5 years now, where we actually fired the guns and collected the data, and now we're actually seeing the damage that that information gives us.
Yes, and the ballistic study was just live fire into tissue simulant, as well as backstops and so forth, which will record the velocity of the bullets as they pass through things and also exit the barrel. Provide us tremendous amount of information, and seeing these bullet holes is confirmation that those live fire studies are showing that the velocity of these bullets, let's use the British Brown Bess as the example, since that's what we seem to be dealing with in the house, is that they were going at anywhere from 900 to 1,200 feet per second and going through the soft wood and still having enough energy to pass through not only the siding and the sheeting, but interior wall paneling as well, before they lost their kinetic energy. So if those balls didn't hit anything, and we know that others did because there were a number of provincials killed in that house or around it, that these 1 ounce balls that were being fired, or nearly 1 ounce, are extremely deadly.
Really kind of brings home just really what was happening that day. And it's such a dangerous, incredibly dangerous environment. When you have soldiers and civilians caught up in it, just absolutely terrifying. So any final thoughts about this study?
We need to finish it.
We're actually working on that right now, Jim. We're in the process. Doug's doing a part, and Chris and I are working on another part, and we're going to try and get it all together, and it's going to be published into book form. So.
Well, we will certainly look forward to that. So thank you, gentlemen. Again, Joel Boy, Chris Fox, and Doug Scott. And so happy Patriots Day, everyone.